And in recent years, and that's why we know him, that's why we invited him, he has been known as an outstanding researcher, scholar of the issue, and with a lot of own work and publications on the issue of the impact of China's growth in the developing world, mostly in Latin America, also some work on sub-Saharan Africa. But we, of course, are mostly interested in his knowledge on the relation between China and Latin America, and especially on the impact of China's growth on Latin America. He's also an author of a recently published book. It's from 2018 or 19. I'm not sure at this moment. A book called "How China is Reshaping the Global Economy." We certainly recommend this book. So thank you very much, Professor Jenkins, and please go ahead. We are waiting for your speech. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Johannes. Right. Well, I'm hoping that I can do my slideshow. I hope this has now come up on everybody's screens that I'm sharing it with you. And thank you for the kind words of introduction and for inviting me to participate in this week of events to celebrate the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Chile and the People's Republic of China. And I think that it's relevant to discuss my topic today of the Belt and Road Initiative in this context, because one can think historically of how 1970 was a significant year because it really marked the beginning of diplomatic relations between China and Latin America. Chile was the first, apart from Cuba, country to recognize the People's Republic in Latin America. And it was followed in the 1970s and 1980s by a number of other Latin American countries. And of course, some countries have only quite recently recognized the People's Republic, as in the case of Panama or of Dominican Republic and El Salvador. Now, the 1970 was a significant year. I think 2001 was also a significant year in terms of the economic relations between Latin America and the People's Republic, because 2001 was the year when China became a member of the World Trade Organization. And of course, from then, there was very rapid rate of growth of economic relations with Latin America. So today's talk, I'm really going to be asking the question whether 2018, which saw the invitation to Latin American countries to participate in the Belt and Road Initiative, is a similar significant year in terms of changes in the relationship between Latin America and China.
Rhys, excuse me, we cannot see your slides.
Okay, I'll wonder what's happened there. Have you seen them at all, or?
No, not at all.
All right. Well, I've only had
we
the
saw them in the test
so
before, but now we did not see them.
Right.
In the test we did before starting the event, it worked, so it will certainly work within a minute. So I kindly ask you for your patience, the audience.
Profesor Jenkins, en la parte inferior de su pantalla debe aparecer la opción de compartir pantalla y ahí tiene que seleccionar cuál de las dos pantallas quiere compartir.
Perfect.
¿Está bien?
Está bien. Now we can see it perfectly. Thank you.
Okay. Bueno. No han perdido mucho porque solo mostraba lo del primer slide de título.
Perfecto.
Yeah. Entonces, oh, I'm getting confused which language I'm speaking in.
Oh, go ahead in English,
but
please.
I'll stick with English. Right. Well, just in terms of a bit of background, China's economic relations with Latin America and the Caribbean, as I said, there have been significant growth since 2001. Trade has grown very rapidly by more than 20 times since 2001. So the last year, bilateral trade with Latin America came to over $300 billion US. And the foreign direct investment, which was not that significant in the first decade of the 21st century, only about $2 billion US a year. But after the global financial crisis in the second decade of the century, foreign investment from China into the region has gone up to about $11 billion a year. There's been a similar kind of increase in the scale of Chinese contracts in infrastructure, which went up over the same period between the first and second decades of the century from about $1.5 billion a year to $12 billion a year. Nevertheless, as I put on the slides, the significance of Chinese foreign investment in the region still lags behind the US and European EU foreign investment in the region. And if you look at it from the point of view of Chinese infrastructure, construction activities, this is much less significant in Latin America than it is in Africa, which, as Johannes mentioned, is another area that I've had an interest in Chinese involvement in. Finally, the fourth aspect of China's economic relations with Latin America that I want to highlight here is in terms of loans. And there is a very high level of loans coming from the Chinese policy banks in the period from 2009 to 2015. But that has been reversed in recent years. Right, let me now say a little about the Belt and Road Initiative. This was launched, as many of you may know, by Xi Jinping in 2013. It was originally referred to as the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Maritime Silk Road, and also as the OBOR, the One Belt, One Road. When in 2016, the official translation of the initiative came to be known as the Belt and Road Initiative, the official English translation. Now, originally, there were around 60 countries included in the initiative. And this is one of the early maps showing the Belt and Road Initiative routes. The overland ones essentially linking China with Europe, and the maritime Silk Roads to the South Pacific, and again through the Indian Ocean to Europe. Now, by 2020, the number of countries that had, one estimate at least I've seen of the number of countries that have signed up to the BRI puts it at 138 countries, which is obviously the majority of countries in the world are now part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, what exactly is the Belt and Road Initiative? It highlights 5 so-called cooperation priorities in all the official Chinese documents about the BRI. The first one is policy coordination, the idea that there should be some attention to an alignment of development strategies at the regional level. Secondly, and the one that has been given most attention, I think, in a lot of discussion around the Belt and Road initiative is facilities connectivity, that is building infrastructure of various kinds, particularly road, rail links, ports, power grids, and telecommunication networks. Now, thirdly, unimpeded trade or trade and investment facilitation, really, that extends to developing special economic zones, bilateral investment treaties, and so on. Fourthly, it highlights financial integration, which includes the measures to get the renminbi used much more widely as an international currency, and the launching of the Silk Road Fund as a way of providing finance to the Silk Road projects, and so on. And finally, there's a fifth point, which is people-to-people relations, which includes both education, cultural, scientific exchanges, and on the economic side, tourism as well. Now, there is some debate about whether the BRI in the literature, whether the BRI is really a coordinated, centralized strategy of Chinese government or not. I mean, that idea is rather promoted by the idea that it's a very centralized and focused project is promoted by the way in which it's presented by official Chinese documents, but also by Western critics of the BRI, who have a rather negative view of it. And of course, the fact that it's so closely associated with President Xi Jinping himself lends some credence to that idea that it is a centrally driven strategy. But other writers on the BRI have highlighted the way in which it is in fact rather lacking in specifics, and the way that it's presented is often quite vague, and that's opened up the possibilities for it being used by different interest groups to promote their particular individual interests. And so it's much less of a coordinated strategy because it involves all sorts of different provincial governments, state-owned enterprises, the policy banks, some private enterprises, and so on. So it's much less centralized than one might think. Now, where does Latin America fit into the BRI? Well, as we saw with the map that I showed earlier, Latin America and the Caribbean was not originally part of the BRI, and they were only formally invited to participate in the BRI at the China CELAC forum that was held in Santiago in January 2018. But by 2019, 19 countries from Latin America and the Caribbean had actually signed a memorandum of understanding on the BRI with China. Now, these MOUs are quite brief documents. They provide a rather broad general framework without any specific commitments on the part of the parties in terms of projects or investments that would be made. As I say, 19 countries have signed up to the BRI, but so far there are a number of countries that haven't, including the 4 largest Latin American countries, plus, of course, the countries that don't have diplomatic relations with the People's Republic. So there are a significant number of countries and accounting for a significant share of the region's economic activity that are not part of the BRI. Now, there were expectations at the time in 2018 of significant increases and boosts to relations between Latin America and China as a result of the BRI. I mean, the executive director of ECLAC, Cepal, Alicia Barcena, is quoted as saying at the Silk Road Forum in Paris in 2018, and that the BRI offers opportunities to diversify and improve the quality of economic relations with China. And more specifically, it can help attract much needed investment in infrastructure, industry, and services. So there was significant expectations of the BRI when it was launched. Now, what I want to try and do in the last part of this presentation is to carry out a rather preliminary analysis of the actual impacts that the BRI has had in the region and on its relations, economic relations with China. Now, of course, one has to recognize that it's very early days to see what these impacts could be. But I think it's important to try and evaluate it now because, of course, and to look at the situation as it evolved up to 2019, because the impact of COVID-19 has really disrupted things significantly, so that it'll be rather difficult, perhaps for a number of years, to see what the longer term effects of the BRI will have been on relations between China and Latin America. And again, I'm going to focus on the 4 areas of bilateral economic relations that I mentioned earlier. The impacts on trade, foreign investment, Chinese projects, and on finance. Now, as I say, most countries with MOUs with China about the BRI signed them either in 2018 or early part of 2019. So what I'm going to do is to take a comparison between the situation in 2019 and the averages in the period leading, annual averages in the period leading up to the BRI being launched in Latin America. That is the 5 years, 2013 to 2017. And I'm going to be looking at 2 basic questions. The first is whether or not there has been an increase in economic relations between China and the region as a whole in 2019. And secondly, whether one can see any differences between the growth of economic relations with countries that have signed the BRI Memorandum of Understanding on the one hand, and those that don't have BRI MOUs on the other, to do a sort of with and without comparison. And as I say, I'm going to do that in relation to trade and foreign investment, projects, and finance. Okay, well, starting with looking at trade, the top half of the table, and it'll be the same for the other tables that I'll be showing, the top half shows the overall situation for Latin America as a whole, and the bottom half of the table shows the situation disaggregated by country to see which countries have increased and which have had a reduction in their economic relations with China. So when one looks at trade, one can see that compared to the period before BRI, there was a significant increase in trade with China. 2019 was a peak year for trade between Latin America and China. The trade had been growing since 2016, really, before BRI was extended to the region, partly because of the recovery of commodity prices that led to growth of exports and import capacity from China. But while most countries, I mean, what the table also shows is that although overall there was a significant increase in trade between China and Latin America in 2019, it was actually faster in the countries that didn't have a BRI MOU than in the countries that did. I mean, the non-BRI MOU countries increased by 36% compared to 15% in the BRI countries. And one could also see that signing the BRI MOU was neither a necessary nor a sufficient condition for expansion of trade with China. So you had some countries with BRI MOUs that showed trade decreasing, 6 countries which trade decreased, but you also had a significant number of non-BRI countries with trade increasing. So there was not a direct relationship, at least as far as trade is concerned, between having a BRI MOU and increasing relations with China. The situation when you come to look at foreign direct investment is rather different, and here I'm using data from the Red Académica de América Latina y el Caribe sobre China that reports investments at the firm level, and the advantage of that is that it's reporting it at the times that the investments are announced rather than when they're completed. So given that the pipeline of foreign investment takes some time for things to happen on the ground, announcements seem to be a more relevant indicator. So I'm using that rather than the official Chinese MOFCON data, which are quite problematic as far as foreign investment in Latin America is concerned anyway. Now, what one can see from this table is that overall there's a very marginal increase in Chinese foreign investment in Latin America in 2019 compared to the 5 years before the BRI came along. But in contrast to the situation with trade, foreign investment has grown much more rapidly in the countries which do have agreements with China than those which don't. I mean, in fact, they've more than doubled in the countries that have agreements, and they've fallen by almost 3/4 in the countries that don't. Now, that might suggest that, yes, look, the BRI is leading to substantial increase in Chinese foreign investment in Latin America, but I wonder whether that's really been a result of the BRI or not. I mean, because when you look at it in more detail, you find that most of the foreign investment that's been recorded in 2019 is accounted by 4 very large investments taking place in Peru, Chile, and Bolivia. And most of the countries that did have agreements on the BRI saw foreign investment fall, as did the ones that didn't have BRI agreements. Now, that leads me to ask whether these investments the specific projects were really related to the BRI or not. And it seems to me that it's a bit difficult to maintain that several of them were. I mean, there were 2 of the major investments were acquisitions of electricity companies by State Grid in Chile and by Three Gorges in Peru, which really didn't have any clear relationship with the BRI. And similarly, in the case of the big investment in lithium mining in Bolivia, it's questionable whether that was BRI related. Or more plausible example, which might have been, was the Costco investment in the port of Chancay in Peru. It might indeed be BRI related, but that was just the one project. So although foreign investment increased significantly in BRI countries, it's not clear that it was because of the BRI. Now, I've again taken the information on infrastructure contracts in Latin America from the Red China data, as I did for foreign investment. And that shows a somewhat similar pattern, except that the level overall has increased rather more than for foreign investment. But again, the same difference. The BRI countries have seen a big increase in 2019 compared to 2013-17, whereas non-BRI countries saw a fall. But again, disaggregated by countries, you see a rather mixed pictures. 6 out of 10 countries with BRI MOUs had lower levels of contracts in 2019 than in the preceding 5 years. And again, one can say that the overall figures are very much influenced by what happened in a couple of countries. In Argentina, where there was a big drop in BRI projects over the period, and in Peru, where there was a significant increase. Again, in the Peruvian case related to the contract on the port. And it's worth noting as well that in 2019, the largest project in Latin America was the Bogota Metro, in Colombia, which again is not a country that has signed a memorandum of understanding on the BRI. Finally, I look at loans from policy banks to Latin America and the Caribbean. And the most striking thing here is that how there's been a very large fall in lending, both to BRI and non-BRI countries. In fact, in 2019, it's the lowest level of loans from the policy banks to Latin America since 2008. And it's been argued that the policy banks, the Chinese policy banks, are really taking measures to try and reduce their exposure and their lending risks in the region and try to protect their existing assets, not least, of course, in Venezuela. So what's clear from this is that the BRI did not unleash a new stream of lending to the region from China. Okay, well, let me just conclude then what my grounds are for being rather skeptical about the impact of the BRI in Latin America in terms of economic relations. Again, with the caveats that it's still early days, but nevertheless, one needs to try and see what's going on. Now, first of all, Latin America, as I've been saying, was invited to join BRI rather late, so that any advantage of being a first mover and of participating has obviously been diluted, since so many countries are now included in the BRI. It doesn't seem to make that much difference. One could also look at the actual terms of these MOUs that are signed between Latin America and the BRI, and one finds that they don't contain any very specific commitments by the countries that tie them to any particular investments or projects and so on. But it also notes that in general, the discussion of the BRI, what's tended to happen is that a lot of projects which may have been planned or discussed and or even in operation before the BRI came into effect are then relabeled as being part of the BRI, even though they don't necessarily have much to do with it. Now, some of the economic relations that I've looked at show continuation with pre-BRI trends. I mean, in the case of trade, trend since 2016 for trade, bilateral trade to increase, and on the other hand, the trend for loans to fall seem to have continued in both BRI and non-BRI countries after countries have signed up to the BRI. In other areas where there have been divergences between BRI and non-BRI countries, in the case of Chinese investment and Chinese projects, again, I would note that these are actually the result of very small number of cases, projects, and that those projects were not actually necessarily a result of the BRI and might have taken place regardless. So again, that's my reason for answering the question, as it were, of whether this is a real significant change in terms of relations with Latin America. My argument is that 2018 is not likely to go down in the future as a major step change in the relationship with China, which is not to say that there won't be growing Sino-Latin American relations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Jenkins. I think that was a fantastic insight into very recent trends in this relationship between China and Latin America from the Belt and Road Initiative perspective. And as Professor Jenkins mentioned, it's certainly almost impossible to evaluate the impacts with data from one single year in comparison to the previous situation. But as Professor Jenkins showed us, it's a very interesting image you can build, and especially we invited him as an expert on this issue, as he has been observing these relations for many years, and therefore obviously his interpretation of very recent events is of key importance for us. I invite everybody who has questions that please put them in the section of Q&A, preguntas y respuestas, and at the end of the session, after listening also to the presentation of Juliana González, we will address the questions directed to both of the panelists. As we have listened to the perspective of an outstanding researcher from outside the region, we thought it would be important and very interesting to us to build a certain contrast with the perspective from within the Latin American region. So we decided to invite Juliana González Jáuregui. She is a researcher at FLACSO Argentina, where she is dedicated to international relations. She has been trained, she has a PhD in social science, and dedicated her work to commercial relations between China and Latin America. So she's pretty close to what Professor Jenkins is working on. But she has also important work on geopolitical perspective on agribusiness, especially the role of China, impacts in Argentina, perhaps also Brazil, mostly Argentina, if I'm right. So she will bring to us the perspective from inside the region. She also has several years of training in Chinese, so that's also an issue. And for all of us who try to learn Chinese, we envy you a lot for having success in that difficult task. So please, Juliana.
Thank you, Johannes, and thank you for the university and the Confucius Institute that invited me to talk to the audience today. It's an honor for me to participate of this seminar, this webinar today. And thank you also for Rhys Jenkins for his words. I think we can complement each other with our presentations today. What I brought is something that is related to BRI, but I wanted to discuss more or to focus more on green BRI and what it is proposing for the region in terms of renewable energy. And also, if I have time, I will try to discuss some things related to BRI in terms of digital BRI and also health BRI, and what are the projections for the region in those terms. I also wanted to focus in Argentinian case, as I am Argentinian, and my research has been focused in Chinese and Argentinian relations for like 10 years. So I would like to start with trying to focus on, I didn't bring a presentation, but I wanted to tell you today that I wanted to step from what Jenkins, Professor Jenkins first said. BRI has been proposing since its inception in 2013 and its official launching in 2015, and new opportunities for shared growth among countries through the five priorities that Professor Jenkins already mentioned. The thing is that amidst the global pandemic, it takes like a new and more profound relevance, and it has the potential to contribute in terms of building economic growth paths that are inclusive and sustainable. According to the World Bank, in fact, the BRI would increase the FDI, or the foreign direct investments for the world, or for the countries, the BRI countries, by almost an 8%. So alongside the significant benefits associated, especially with the major infrastructure that BRI proposes, there are like large infrastructure, finance, sustainable related risks, and BRI is no exception in those terms. So I wanted to focus on this, that is important, that the green BRI is compatible yes, with the sustainable development goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. The green BRI is expected, in fact, to be the mainstream of green development through the 5 connectivities of the 5 priorities of the BRI. And as BRI puts transportation, but also energy infrastructure among like its top priority areas, and it's emphasizing in consideration the climate change impacts in the infrastructure development. I wanted to focus on saying that since its inception, BRI building intended to be like a pathway for green development, and has been the aspiration and expectation of the Chinese government and the shared goal of all the participating countries to become or to make a BRI a path to green development, shifting like from conventional model of development growth to a high quality development, which means considering, of course, climate change mitigation and also energy transition. The thing is that from March 2015, when the first or one of the most important documents that the government of China issued along the Belton Road, the famous vision and actions on jointly blending the Silk Road economic belt and the 21st century maritime Silk Road. The documents there proposes the promotion of investments and trade where climate change mitigation and energy transition would be a priority. So as the BRI gradually expands, the green BRI framework gains like a positive response. In fact, the Ministry of Ecology and Environment in China launched the BRI International Green Development Coalition. This happened in the first Silk or the first BRI forum in 2017, and it was officially launched last year in the second forum of the BRI. As well as China has expanded certain platforms such as the BRI Environmental Big Data Platform, for example, and is pursuing all very enthusiastically the BRI in terms of green development. But I wanted to show some data that, for example, this year, 2020 study in Nature Sustainability found that only 17 out of 65 financiers associated with BRI require biodiversity mitigation, and only one of those is Chinese. That is the China ASEAN Investment Cooperation Fund. So China is facing severe challenges in establishing mechanisms and as also ways or policies that mitigate such risks associated with BRI projects. The BRI, in fact, or most of the BRI projects are at least from 2014 to 2019. Most of the projects are heavily concentrated in fossil fuel energies, such as oil, gas, and of course, petrochemical industries. 72% of the projects, in fact, are related to fossil fuels energies. And the loans that are given, not only the investments, but also the loans that are given among the BRI are related to fossil fuels energies. So Green Belt and Road Initiative is like trying to paraphrase Rhys Jenkins, is something that is at least it has like many expectations, but also it represents like a label. In fact, in Latin America, I wanted to go to Latin America now, and try to focus from the investments and the financing that China is providing to Latin America, not among the BRI, but as Professor Jenkins said, like before the pandemic, yes. From 2005 to 2020, Chinese banks have provided loans to the energy sector in Latin America for an amount of $1,001 billion approximately, which represent more than 67% of the total loans that China is, or Chinese policy banks are providing to the region. The main recipients of these energy loans are Venezuela in the first place, secondly, Brazil, third, Ecuador, and fourth, Argentina. And if you see, for example, the loans in Venezuela, it's mainly for the oil sector, loans for oil deals. In the case of Brazil, the loans have been destinated to gasoline pipeline, the Petrobras subsidiary in charge of gas production in Brazil, and the execution of the pipeline by Sinopec in Brazil in I think it's four years ago. In the case of Ecuador, well, in Brazil, we also have a coal plant that is related to Chinese loans, and also oil productions in the pre-salt oil fields. So in the case of Ecuador, we also have not only the central loans go to hydroelectric dams that are not renewable energy, but have a big biodiversity impact. And in the case of Argentina, we have big loans for the hydroelectric dams and also renewable energies, but centrally hydroelectric dams have received a huge amount of loans. So according to the China Global Investment Tracker, investments in China between 2005 and 2019 in Latin America in energy projects represent 56% of all investments, and most of them, as I previously mentioned, are designated or are related to fossil fuels energies. So we have like some cases last year for hydroelectric dams, for example, a project of hydroelectric dams in Peru and investments, also for renewables, 2 solar plants and 6 wind farms in Brazil. We also have the US-based Centro in Chile that sold its Chilean and Peruvian equity interest to a Chinese company. But then again, because of the COVID-19, for example, there have been like fewer new Chinese projects, as Professor Rhys Jenkins just already said. However, the region is particularly well positioned to leverage the renewable industry. Around a quarter of Latin American energy supply currently comes from alternative sources, including bioenergy and hydroelectric dams, though it's not taking fully advantage, for example, of solar and wind resources. So the fossil fuels still accounts for around 75% of the primary matrix of the primary energy supply in Latin America. So there's like both a compromise from China in its BRI compromises in the future, in the near future, and also a Latin American issue that we have to consider in terms of this, that governments will need to be proactive and set out a green recovery plan amidst or after the pandemic, setting out a green recovery plan focused in the renewable energy sector. And now I wanted to go to to the Argentinian case, which is in terms of loans and investments, is a really important recipient of Chinese presence in Latin America. The arrival of Chinese FDI in Argentina was limited before 2003. And then after the Memorandum of Understanding that the government signed in 2004, when China and Argentina became strategic partners, or strategic, partners, then investments increased, in fact, from 2010 ahead. We have like really important investments, but especially following a resource-seeking pattern, especially mainly in oil and gas, but also in mining, in agribusiness and fisheries. Also, we have many investments, recent investments in the meat industry, and of course in the financial and services sectors. I don't want to go to the specific investments in agribusiness, for example, or meat. You can ask me during the Q&A session, but I truly wanted to focus on financing, for example, in terms of infrastructure, and especially in terms of renewable energy for Argentina from China. So Argentina has received since 2017 a huge, our important loan from the Exim Bank of China to develop three solar parks in Jujuy, in the north part of Argentina. That is the largest park, solar park in South America. It was inaugurated last year. But we also have important loans from the China Development Bank and the ICBC, and also the Bank of China, financing the construction of 2 hydroelectric dams in the south part of Argentina. This has been a really controversial case that I can focus in the QA part. And also we have a letter of understanding, or a letter, sorry, of intent, where the ICBC could provide a loan for 10 billion for the construction or the development of the 4th nuclear plant in Argentina. Despite that, or in spite of Argentina not being formally part of BRI, thanks, Johannes, I'm almost finishing. Despite of not formally being part of BRI, Argentina is infrastructure, but mainly energy, not only infrastructure in terms of railways, for example, and roads, but also in terms of energy, as I have pointed out. China is really a huge player in terms of not only loans, but also investments in our markets. And of course, Argentina has found in China a deep-pocketed partner in terms of that China is providing loans that are playing an increasingly relevant role that is not being provided by other players, like, for example, the United States or other big players. For the future we have ahead is what I wanted to point out is that Latin American countries have the issue to formulate especially infrastructure strategies to clarify the role of BRI in their national long-term social and economic development plans. And that means not only the green BRI, but also the whole BRI as a concept and as the Professor Jenkins said, as a label, but also in terms of how can we cooperate with China in terms of the digital Silk Road that is already developing very fast and very properly in Southeast Asia, for example, and of course in the east of Europe, and it's coming to Latin America also. We have to figure out what our countries are going to do in that terms, and of course in terms of the health Silk Road that has had a huge a role during the pandemic. So those are my topics, and that's my conclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Definitely the issue of greening energy mix and the role of renewable energies is definitely something which is a potential future connection between America, Latin America and China. So thank you very much, Juliana. We would now like to proceed to the Q&A part of this panel. So it's still open. You can write your questions in the preguntas y respuestas section. I will transmit them to the speaker. Some might be oriented to a specific speaker. Others maybe can involve both. I will try to just work with them in the order they arrive. If I see something which is potentially possible to bring them together, I will try to do that. So please feel free to keep on writing questions. We already have several, but let's get started. So first, and I suppose that is a question that is oriented mainly to Professor Jenkins, which is asking about the role of the potential role of the Pacific Alliance, of those 4 countries in Latin America. So in what sense this can be a possibility of projecting the international relation of Chile to the relation to China, especially considering the participation of Mexico in this Pacific Alliance and some limitations Mexico has to address, as it is also part of the USMCA, the US-Mexico-Canada alliance. So that's the question: the role of the Pacific Alliance in the future projection of Chile's relationship with China.
Right. I think there's, to put it in a broader context, and how far or how significant are regional arrangements in terms of, Sino-Latin American relations. I mean, after all, China seemed to give quite a bit of attention to CELAC and announced the invitation to join the BRI at the CELAC forum in Santiago, as I mentioned, in 2018. So at one level, it seems as though China wants to relate to regional organizations, and the Pacific Alliance is obviously one of those. But on the other hand, the reality is that I think China's relations with the countries of Latin America are actually developed on a bilateral basis in reality, but it's not a regional strategy. And on the other hand, the Latin American countries don't really have a regional strategy either. There are differences in interests between different countries, so that they find it difficult to come to any common position. And I wonder whether that's also the case with the Pacific Alliance in terms of its relations with China. So I would be a bit skeptical about that the Pacific Alliance playing a leading role in the relationship. I think it's more likely that the actual real action that takes place would be at the bilateral level with the individual countries. And after all, in terms of the BRI, I mean, you've got 2 countries in in the Pacific Alliance who haven't signed pre-MOUs and deal with them with, you know, also different interests as well. So, yeah, I wouldn't put too much hopes personally on the Pacific Alliance.
Perfect, perfect. And as you stress the importance of bilateral relations, I would add a different question which arises here. Considering third parties in the bilateral relations, the question is the possible effects of the very close US presidential elections. So that might be a question for Rhys. It might also be a question for Juliana from the Argentinian perspective. What do you think? Will there be an impact of the outcome of those elections on those bilateral relations between Chile and China, Argentina and China? I'm extending a little bit the question to Argentina as well.
Do you want to take that on Argentina, Juliana?
Okay, I can start. In fact, the elections, we are really in a complicated situation between the both powers, we can say, between the United States, because we have recently started our debt recovery, and also we have a really good relationship and really long relationship with China. So in Argentina, most of the academics are saying that we should maybe play both cards, try to have a good relations with both countries. We are about to sign the BRI Memorandum of Understanding, maybe in November, maybe in March next year, when the president goes to China to meet Xi Jinping. And at the same time, the US has launched last year the Growth in the Americas, that seems to be like a platform that is not so important as BRI, but that is starting to give pressure for countries in general in Latin America, and for Argentina especially, we expect so. So the thing is that I think in general in Latin America, and especially in Argentina, we can, what I think we, as countries, as Latin American countries, should do is try to play both cards, try to have good relationships with both. But I think it will be like a difficult issue to tackle with in the near future, especially if Trump keeps the power in the United States. And I think Biden would be like less confrontative, but we're going to expect like this rivalry to keep on going. So yes.
Thank you, Juliana. Rhys, some comments on the US elections and impact on Chile-China relations? Or
well, I think you know, it will depend obviously to some extent on the outcomes, but I'm not sure that it will make an enormous difference in that Biden might not have the same sort of rhetoric as Trump, but nevertheless, he won't want to be seen as being soft on China either, which is what Trump will accuse him of being. So there obviously is, you know, over and above the rhetoric, there is obviously continuing rivalry, as Juliana was suggesting, that's going to be going on there. And I saw there was a recent report that now the Brazilian government is considering whether to exclude China and Huawei from the 5G network in Brazil, which of course here in the UK they've decided to do, and that is partly, you know, in response to the pressure from the United States. So, you know, when it becomes so confrontational, and you've got somebody like Trump who thinks that you're either on his side or you're against him, that rather narrows the room for maneuver. I think that for Latin American countries, I think that Biden would, at least Biden presidency would provide a bit more room for maneuver for Latin American countries to do what Juliana was suggesting, and to be able to deal with both parties without having to be seen as being taking sides, as it were.
I have one very specific direct question to Rhys. You mentioned that Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia have not signed MOU on BRI. The question is why?
Yes, that's a very good question. It's, I was at another webinar last week and I asked the speaker that question as well. It is very striking. And I'd be interested to hear what Juliana has to say about the Argentinian case, where Argentina seems to be the one that's, in what I've seen, is most likely of those four countries to actually sign an MOU with China. I think it's partly because I would argue there are no great, very clear advantages from having the MOU, so that if you can afford not to have one, why go down that route? I mean, there just isn't that much substance to it, is what I've been arguing. And, you know, okay, maybe if some of the smaller Latin American countries didn't accept an MOU on the BRI, then they might suffer some negative consequences. Brazil, it's not going to be in that position, you know, so the larger Latin American countries, I think, don't have to go along with that kind of labeling, as I've referred to it, of their relations with China, and so they haven't gone down that route. That's my, you know, interpretation of it.
Would you like to complement something on that, Juliana, or leave it there for the moment? We have also a question which I think that is you could help us with this one, Juliana, definitely. This is about a rather cultural aspect of the relations. And the question here is, why do you think that the cultural relations between Argentina and China are much stronger than those between Chile and China?
Such a question. I think we have, although Chile and China have, like, as Argentina, a long-standing relationship with China. The thing is that I think that at first, for example, the good relationships that characterize Chile with especially with the United States, maybe it would be like an impact in terms of cultural approach from China to Chile, and more to for example for Argentina. Argentina has expressed a lot of interest in terms of developing cultural relationships during this decade, but also during the Cold War, and I think that comes from then, no? When the Cold War was, and we had a very good relationship with China in terms of I mean, common interest in terms of communist approach, not during the dictatorship, but during the democratic governments. And I think that might be the reason why Chile has stepped a little bit away from the cultural approach from China during that period. And that is why today maybe Argentina has better or yes, more profound cultural relations with China. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Here is a question which I suppose can also be directed to both of you. This goes about experiences of collaboration within BRI. So the question is, could you comment or contrast different experiences in Latin America regarding the BRI beyond the different products or production, rather regarding reactions and responses in each country? Or in other words, what differences do you see regarding specific countries in their involvements with the BRI?
Well, I think that relates back to the last question I was answering, really, about why some countries have not got involved with the BRI and others have. Or one could put it in more general terms about the relations between different Latin American countries and China, beyond the BRI or as well as the BRI. And of course, one has, you know, though now they're not, they're a diminishing group. There are the countries that don't have relations with China for various reasons, mainly smaller countries, Central America and the Caribbean, and of course Paraguay, and we still have the relationship with Taiwan, and who have benefited economically from financial support from Taiwan to keep them in that situation. And I think that there are also, you know, differences in terms of, you know, the extent to which public opinion. I haven't looked at the latest public opinion surveys by people like Latino Barometro and Pew in the US, but they sometimes show quite significant differences. And I think I was reading some report recently that Mexico seems to be standing out now because it has quite a favorable view of China, which it has not had in the past. But that's partly because it's had such an unfavorable view in the public perception of the United States, and of the Trump presidency has been so unfavorable that that's actually suggesting that it's kind of led to a more positive view being taken in Mexico towards China. So there are a number of conjunctural factors that affect the attitudes in different countries.
I have here recently came in another question that's specifically about Argentina, connecting back to the previous one I made to I oriented to Juliana. I will just read it. There is a growing presence of Chinese in Argentina, especially in Buenos Aires. Is the Argentine public becoming closer to the Chinese community? Are there increasing numbers of Chinese workers within the BRI successfully integrating into Argentinian society? If not, how do you see the Chinese creating more positive images, such as the US image manipulation via Hollywood? Will there be a tango dancing Chinese cartoon character promoted in Argentina?
In fact, yes, there is I think Argentina is tending to try to understand China better. That's why more Argentinians are studying Chinese, more entrepreneurs are trying to export and to deal with Chinese investors, and also try to to become part of the missions, of the economic missions that every year not only the national governments but also the subnational governments do to China. There's like a huge interest in general to try to understand China, not only in terms of cultural issues, but also in terms of how the Chinese think, how they started, for example, to grow and to become the second largest economy in the world. So yes, definitely the public is becoming closer to the Chinese community. In fact, they are like more interested in knowing, for example, entrepreneurs are more interested in knowing what the Chinese eat and what Argentina can, for example, export to China in terms of food, right? In terms of the workers, we have many workers that are working in Argentina in different projects, renewable projects, infrastructure projects. Also, Huawei has been in Argentina since 2001. So we have a Huawei brand here, but is mostly dedicated to assembling products. But the thing is that Argentina has not still signed the memorandum of understanding. So maybe we can expect, if we are going to sign the BRI memorandum of understanding, we can expect more workers and maybe yes, try to create Chinese more positive images. The embassy in Argentina, the Chinese embassy in Argentina is really proactive, and we have in fact produced bilateral documentals so that Argentina, both Chinese and Argentinian, can understand both people. So yes.
Perfect. Thank you, Juliana. We're almost done. I would like to close with the last question to Professor Jenkins, if you allow. Considering the difficulties caused by the current pandemic and the economic crisis which is produced by this, do you believe that the relation to China and particularly BRI can play an important role to overcome in a short term the impacts of this crisis?
Wow, that's a very good question. I don't think in the short term that it will. And I think the problem, as I was suggesting, was that in terms of that it won't be very much to do with the BRI, BRI in terms of coming out of the crisis. I think that there will be further, if the things won't get back to normal, but I think when the pandemic is brought under control, then there will be further growth in economic relations with China, between China and Latin America. And that's going to be, part of the long-term trend as China becomes a much more significant player, as it, becomes the largest economy in the world. Latin America will certainly, more Latin American countries will certainly have closer relations with it. I don't see that as, I think the way that one comes out of the crisis, of course, it's a global issue, but it's also going to depend on what individual countries, governments, and peoples do to overcome it. And as we can see, very different responses in different countries around the world, that depends on that. And so, again, I don't think China is a magic bullet in any of this. And I think that there are often expectations of China run ahead of the reality in so many cases, and have for the last decade at least.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was really an excellent insight you gave us into these current tendencies and the importance of BRI and its limitation, its limited importance as well. So we'll keep on working on that, I think, from as researchers. And thank you both presenters in this panel. Unfortunately, in the webinar we can't hear the applause of the audience, but I'm sure it's there. So thank you so much for taking your time and for giving us these insights, and thank you all of you, the public, for your questions, for your interest in this topic. And please feel invited. We invite you to participate in the next 4 days. We have every day in the morning at 9 o'clock Chilean time as a webinar. The detailed program is available where you found the program of today. There are also included the sessions in the next few days. Tomorrow there is a session on diplomacy, and on Wednesday a session on a universities panel. So again, thank you very much to all of you, and hopefully see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you, Professor Jenkins and Juliana, for a wonderful presentation.